For 500 years, there's been one little book that's served as a masterclass in power, a lightning rod for controversy, and basically a synonym for political evil. And that book is Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince. It's so infamous, it literally turned its author's name into an insult. So to really get what it's all about, we have to start with one simple question.
Right? When we hear that word, Machiavellian, what pops into your head? For most of us, it's probably some dark, shadowy figure in a back room, pulling the strings, whispering conspiracies, someone who will do absolutely anything to get what they want. And yeah, that's pretty much the popular definition, isn't it? It's basically shorthand for a kind of pure, cold-blooded political strategy. It's this idea that morality, well, that's for other people. For a ruler, results are the only thing that actually matter. It's a pretty dark reputation to have.
But what if that's only scratching the surface? What if I told you that to really, truly understand The Prince, you can't just read the book? No, you have to understand the man who wrote it, and the completely broken world he was desperately trying to fix.
See, this story isn't about some prince sitting on a throne dreaming up ways to be a tyrant. No, it's about a dedicated public servant, a patriot, who watched his entire country fall apart and then lost every single thing he cared about.
So you gotta meet the man Niccolo Machiavelli. He wasn't born into power or anything like that. He was a bureaucrat, a top diplomat for the Free Republic of Florence. His whole job was to navigate this incredibly chaotic Italy that was just packed with scheming popes, foreign armies, and brutal mercenaries. He learned about power not from some comfy throne, but from the messy, dangerous front lines of politics.
And his life was just a total roller coaster. So he grows up during the golden age of the powerful Medici family in Florence. Then, boom, the Medici get kicked out, and he spends the next 15 years serving the new republic. But in 1512, his world completely imploded. The Medici stormed back into power, the republic collapsed, and Machiavelli, he was fired, accused of treason, thrown in prison, and even tortured. And it was right there, from the ashes of his career, that his most famous work was born.
And this, right here, this is the key to the whole thing. Forced out of the only life he ever loved, Machiavelli is banished to his farm. He wrote that at night he would take off his muddy farm clothes, put on his old formal court robes, and in his study he would converse with the great minds of history. The Prince wasn't some cynical thought experiment. It was a desperate, passionate attempt to make sense of his own failure and to pour everything he'd learned into a survival guide for a new leader.
And wow, what a guide it is. Okay, so now we get to the stuff that has been shocking people for centuries. Because Machiavelli's advice, it's not about how to be a good person. It's about how to be an effective leader in a world that is fundamentally dangerous. This quote is his radical break from everything that came before. He's basically saying that any leader who tries to be good and virtuous all the time is just going to get crushed by people who aren't. He's the first guy to really stand up and say, hey, let's stop talking about these imaginary perfect worlds. Let's talk about the world as it actually is, full of betrayal, greed, and violence. And all of this leads him to his most famous question, the one that really gets to the heart of his entire philosophy. What's the more reliable tool for a leader who's trying to hold a state together? Is it love, or is it fear? Machiavelli's logic here is just brutal. He says, look, ideally, a prince would be both, but that's pretty much impossible. Love, he argues, is fickle. It's a bond that people, being selfish creatures, will break the second it's convenient for them. You, the ruler, don't control it. But fear? Fear is based on the threat of punishment. And that is something a prince can control completely. So it's just a much, much safer foundation to build your power on. But wait. Here's the crucial detail that everybody misses. He is not telling princes to be tyrants. He makes it crystal clear. Fear is a tool, but hatred is a poison. A feared leader is respected, obeyed. A hated leader, well, that just inspires conspiracies and rebellion. So how do you use fear without making everyone hate you? To avoid being hated, Machiavelli gives this one core piece of advice. Whatever you do not touch your subjects' property or their women. And a psychological insight here is just chillingly brilliant. He says people get over the execution of a family member way faster than they get over having their inheritance stolen. To keep things stable, a prince has to respect property above all else. So a prince basically has to walk this impossible tightrope. Machiavelli says he needs to combine two different animal natures. First, he needs the raw, overwhelming force of the lion to just scare off his enemies, the wolves. But pure force isn't enough. He also needs the cunning of the fox to recognize traps, to use deception when he has to, and to navigate that complex web of politics. One without the other, he says, just won't last. So all of this sounds very theoretical, right? Cunning like a fox, strong like a lion. But Machiavelli had a real-life example for all his theories. A man he had actually met, who he'd observed up close, and who he saw as the living, breathing embodiment of this brutal, new, effective style of leadership. And his name was Cesare Borgia, the illegitimate son of Pope Alexander VI. Borgia was this brilliant, ambitious, and just utterly ruthless warlord who carved out a kingdom for himself in central Italy with just breathtaking speed and violence. For Machiavelli, watching Borgia was like a masterclass in how a new prince, someone starting from scratch, has to operate.
And just check out this playbook, which Machiavelli saw with his own eyes. First, Borgia weakens his rivals. Then, he invited the rest of them to a peace summit, where he had them all strangled. To bring order to his new territory, he hired this famously cruel henchman to do all the dirty work. But once the job was done, Borgia had that same guy cut in half and left in the town square, basically showing the people that all that cruelty hadn't come from him.
It is absolutely shocking stuff, but for Machiavelli, this was pure genius. He didn't see sadism, he saw these as necessary, calculated acts of what you might call creative destruction. Borgia was using cruelty like a surgeon's scalpel, not randomly, but to achieve a greater good, a unified, stable state where before there had only been chaos and war. Now, in the end, Borgia's power all collapsed when his father, the Pope, died unexpectedly. But the example he set, and Machiavelli's cold-blooded analysis of it, would echo for centuries. Which brings us back to that question. With examples like Borgia, was Machiavelli really just a teacher of evil? So is that all The Prince is? Just a handbook for gangsters? A teacher of evil, which is what people have called it for centuries? Or did Machiavelli give us something more profound and maybe something a lot more uncomfortable?
The book is still with us because it is just so brutally honest. It strips away all the nice-sounding words about virtue and justice, and it just looks at the raw mechanics of power. It's about that eternal fight between what he called virtu, your skill, your drive, your ability to impose your will on the world, and fortuna, which is just sheer dumb luck that can wreck even the best plans. It forces us to ask what we really want from our leaders. Ultimately, you have to remember, Machiavelli's goal wasn't to corrupt people. His goal, writing from the absolute ruins of his own life and his country, was to lay out a blueprint for a leader strong enough and clever enough to unite Italy and kick out the foreign invaders who were tearing it apart. He wasn't trying to write a moral philosophy. He was writing a political emergency plan. And that leaves us right here, wrestling with the same dilemma that Machiavelli threw on the table 500 years ago. If you had to choose, what would you prefer in a leader? Someone who is morally good but fails to protect the state, or someone who uses questionable, even cruel means to make sure it survives and prospers? It's a question that is just as relevant and unsettling today as it was in Renaissance Florence.